quickly. So again, welcome. My name is Jeannie Sager, and I am the director of the Women's Philanthropy Institute. And here at the WPI, we conduct, curate, and disseminate research that grows women's philanthropy. And again, recognizing that it's a busy time of year for so many of you, we are grateful that you have made time today to be part of this important discussion as we consider the state of giving to women's and girls' causes with 3 leaders in this vital work. We look forward to an engaging discussion about the key insights and implications from our latest report, the Women and Girls Index 2020, Measuring Giving to Women's and Girls' Causes. As a highlight, the Women and Girls Index is the only comprehensive index that measures charitable giving to women's and girls' causes in the United States. And we are excited to be able to engage in a conversation with Sarah Hackey-Bird, Executive Director of Women Moving Millions, Megha Desai, President of the Desai Foundation, and Deborah Singer, Chief Marketing Officer for Girls Who Code, to hear their experiences and perspectives on the importance of catalyzing additional funding for women's and girls' causes, particularly coming out of the pandemic. But before we jump into our discussion, I'd like to share the key findings from the report. And I encourage you to visit our website to download the full report and view the infographic. Also, please feel free to enter your questions in the chat box throughout the presentation and the conversation. And we hope to get to as many of them as possible by the end. So again, thank you to our panelists for joining us today. As you can see, we have gathered a diverse group of perspectives and experiences. These are leaders who have devoted their careers to advancing causes that support and uplift women and girls, not only in the United States, but around the world. And the significance of the Women's and Girls Index, also known as the WGI, is that it is the only systematically generated comprehensive index of organizations dedicated to women and girls in the United States. The new WGI 2020 report uses data from the index to describe key characteristics of women's and girls' organizations with a focus on the levels of philanthropic support that they receive. The WGI was first released in 2019, and it provided a snapshot of this information for 2016, which is the most recent year for which finalized IRS data was available at the time. The 2020 index adds historical data for 2012 through 2015, as well as updated data for 2017. This expansion is significant because it provides the first longitudinal look at how philanthropic support for women's and girls' organizations has changed in recent years. Last year, with the report looking at a single year, those findings alone created quite a bit of energy and interest. In fact, the report was highlighted in the March 2020 publication of the Oprah magazine. And moreover, Women Moving Millions used the feature finding that only 1.6% of all philanthropic funds go to organizations focused on women and girls as part of the case for support for their Give Bold, Get Equal campaign that seeks to mobilize $100 million for women and girls by 2022. We look forward to hearing more about that from Sarah in our conversation. In terms of number, we found that there were nearly 47,000 women's and girls organizations across the United States, and that these organizations made up 3.4% of all the charitable organizations in 2017. Since there is no universal definition of women's and girls organizations, a key step in developing the WGI in 2019 was determining the criteria for inclusion. Organizations included in the index are either dedicated to serving primarily women and girls, And the majority of organizations included in the WGI fall in this category. Some examples of these types of organizations would be Planned Parenthood and Girls Inc., or collectives of women and girls that serve general philanthropic purposes. Now, this is a smaller percentage of WG organizations in this category. Examples of these types of organizations are junior leagues and women's auxiliaries. These criteria may seem straightforward, but applying this definition is actually quite challenging, since charitable organizations tend to have multiple programs that serve different populations. Nonetheless, they have worked reasonably well. So the same criteria were used for updating the index in 2020. Turning now to the main findings. Philanthropic support for women's and girls' organizations reached $7.1 billion in 2017, but still represents a small share of charitable giving at 1.6%. This percentage did not change from 2016, when philanthropic support for women's and girls' organizations totaled $6.3 billion. So even though growth in giving to women's and girls' organizations was stronger than growth in giving to charitable organizations overall in 2017, this difference was not large enough to increase WGI organizations' share of total giving. It is still very small in terms of dollars. To put things in perspective, overall charitable giving totaled $432.1 billion in 2017. And although growth in giving to women's and girls' organizations outpaced growth in giving to charitable organizations overall in 2017, looking at the entire 2012 to 2017 period, growth in giving to women's and girls' organizations was very similar to growth in giving to charitable organizations overall. 36.4% for women's and girls' organizations versus 36.9% for charitable organizations overall. And while philanthropic support for women's and girls' organizations increased across the board from 2012 to 2017, certain types of organizations experienced especially strong growth. You can see from the graph that reproductive health organizations saw tremendous growth in philanthropic support during this period at 85.2%. Growth in philanthropic support for these organizations increased by 33.7% in 2017 alone, more than 3 times that of women's and girls' organizations overall in 2017. At 41.6%, organizations focused on family and gender-based violence also saw stronger growth in philanthropic support than women's and girls' organizations overall from 2012 to 2017. However, compared with reproductive health organizations, growth in philanthropic support for these organizations tracked more closely with women's and girls' organizations overall during this time. We chose to highlight these 2 organization types because they are among the largest recipients of philanthropic support for women's and girls' organizations, and because reproductive health organizations did experience such a large increase in charitable giving from 2012 to 2017. The 2020 report also looks at government support for women's and girls' organizations. This is a new data point that was not included last year. We found that growth in government grants to women's and girls' organizations exceeded growth in government grants to non-WGI organizations by a wide margin, 34.4% for women's and girls' organizations versus 14.6% for charitable organizations overall. Although the WGI data alone cannot explain this growth, another new addition to the report this year was that we conducted interviews with leaders of women's and girls' organizations to offer additional insight. These interviews provided some possible explanations for this increase, which we can discuss during the Q&A. At the Women's Philanthropy Institute, we often say that research is just the beginning. It's what you do with it that matters. And the WGI Index provides advocates for women's and girls' causes with data that can help support future initiatives. Development professionals and leaders of women's and girls' organizations can apply the information from this report in benchmarking their organization against others and setting future fundraising goals. Donors can use the research to identify gaps in resources and to inform strategies that align with the unique needs and characteristics of women's and girls' organizations. And additionally, as a publicly available resource, the WGI itself allows researchers to apply a gender lens to both existing studies and future research. Individuals and organizations can access the index at our website, which is philanthropy.iupui.edu /WGI 2020. We'll make sure we'll put this in the chat. And we can use it to answer their own questions on a variety of topics related to women's and girls' organizations. And when we look at this report in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, we know that women, and particularly women of color, have been disproportionately affected. And all of us recognize that women's and girls' causes, particularly those addressing the intersection of race, gender, and other areas of inequality, will need more resources. The WGI's insights can kickstart discussion and action to generate philanthropic support for these critical organizations. And what a time to be having this conversation, right on the heels of a historic moment for women in generosity, with Mackenzie Scott's announcement of gifts this week totaling $4.2 billion to 384 nonprofits. 17.4% of these recipient organizations are nonprofits that serve women and girls. And in her article that she wrote for Medium, she practically made the WPI team swoon as she shared her approach that included the phrase, "Because our research is data-driven and rigorous, our giving process can be human and soft." So with that, let's kickstart the discussion today and talk about the state of funding for women and girls organizations with our esteemed panelists. So welcome, Sarah, Deborah, and Mega. All of you are deeply involved in this work from pretty different perspectives. So I'm going to start with you, Sarah, and I'm going to ask you to share a bit more about Women Moving Millions, and then I'm going to turn it over to Deborah to talk about Girls Who Code, and Mega to talk about the Desai Foundation. So start with you, Sarah.
Thank you, Jeannie. And just, I so value this research, as you know, we'll share a little bit more about as we go through the conversation, but it's just really a pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to share a little bit more about our work and why giving to women and girls is so important. But first, Women Moving Millions. So Women Moving Millions is a philanthropic community comprised of 340 women in 16 countries around the world who each make a minimum $1 million commitment to organizations and initiatives working to improve the lives of women and girls and to advance gender equality. In terms of our work, I'm going to break it down into sort of three distinct buckets. We offer first philanthropic education programming and leadership development programming for our membership community to support their learning, to deepen connection, and of course, to drive greater resources to the field and to spark giving. Second, we work to amplify the work of leaders on the front lines of the movement for gender equality, with the goal to strengthen the connection between our members and those change makers on the ground who are really leading the movement. And conversations like we're having today are so important. These are the types of conversations in particular in this last year that we've been convening with our community to bring those leaders in direct connection with our membership community to share more about their work, what their needs are. So there's that sort of direct strength and link between both funder and change maker. And then three, with our mission to catalyze increased resources for women and girls, we work to advocate for greater funding, which is why this report itself is so critically important. This year marked the first year of a 5-year strategic plan. I know you all can imagine what that meant in terms of a pivot for the organization, but it's actually been really fantastic in this moment. And we've really been able to push the needle. And when we started in 2019 to really assess and look like what's the data around giving to women and girls, we kept coming up with older data. We just couldn't find a number that we needed to anchor our advocacy efforts around. And when 1.6% came out from WPI, that was something we could really hang our hat on. And so this year we launched, as Jeannie shared, a Give Bold, Get Equal campaign to drive an additional $100 million to women and girls from our membership community and also beyond from external sources. And to date, we have been able to secure $95 million with the support of Trish. I see her over there, Trish Jackson, who is our senior advisor. And we're just going to blow past this number. So this work, the research that has been so valuable to us as a community. So I'll stop there, and I have much more to say about that, but thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Deborah, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Jeannie. It's very exciting to be here, and I echo what Sarah shared about how important this report has been in our own efforts to increase funding and attention on women and girls issues. So Girls Who Code is a nonprofit organization focused on closing the gender gap in technology. We started in 2012 with a classroom of 20 high school girls in New York, and today we reach more than 300,000 girls across the country. We run 10,000 after-school clubs in partnerships with schools, libraries, universities, community-based organizations, and we're really starting to move the needle on the pipeline of future female engineers. We have 80,000 college-aged alumni. They are majoring in computer science at 15 times the national average. And from a funding perspective, Girls Who Code is pretty unique in that we get 80% of our funding from corporates. So since 2012, we've raised more than $100 million. Almost all of that has come from corporate investment, and corporates invest in us primarily for two reasons. One is they want access to our pipeline of diverse female engineers. And the second is that they really want employee engagement and opportunities for their employees to volunteer and feel part of this bigger movement. So I'm really happy and excited to share more about our funding, but I will turn it over to Megan next.
Hi, everyone. I'm really honored to be here and really grateful for the work that this institute does, especially helping a small organization like ours. The Desai Foundation is an organization that empowers women and children, especially girls, through health and livelihood programming in both India and the United States. And what that means is that we provide vocational training, entrepreneurship training, life skills training, as well as hygiene and health access. And our flagship program, which we are kind of most well known for, is our menstrual hygiene program. It is an all-encompassing 360 program that attacks the issues around stigmas and access and health around menstruation from every angle. We're a unique organization because we started as a family foundation and actually converted into a public organization, a 501c3, in order to be able to expand and partner with more ease with corporates and other organizations. We serve a population of around 3 million people and produce over 1.2 million pads a year. Oh shoot, sorry. A year. And we've been constantly iterating and evolving our programming, and we've grown quite a bit in the last 4 years. So it's been really exciting to see that expansion. From a funding perspective, we're kind of the exact opposite of where Girls Who Code is, in that almost 100% of our funding comes from individual donors and from small corporate donors. And so we are kind of on the other end of the spectrum. And because of our kind of unique setup as starting as a family foundation, every dollar that comes in through an individual is matched 100% by another fund. So every dollar that comes in gets multiplied by 2. And so that has been a really interesting learning experience for us, because we're really dealing with individuals and their giving journey. And so data and resources like this are really invaluable to us. Thank you.
Thanks for that. So let's take a moment. Sarah shared some of her reactions to the WGI findings I just presented, but I want to give both Deborah and Mega a chance to kind of comment on what might have stuck out for you most in these most recent findings.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it unfortunately wasn't surprising. You know, we'd seen the 1.6 when you released it last year. You know, it's broadly not surprising that women and girls issues continue to be seen as kind of a niche issue. And I think overall, our causes have a messaging problem in that they are seen as niche issues for a kind of minority interest group, when in fact they should be, you know, mainstream. They affect more than 50% of the population, more than 50% of college graduates, more than 50% of households now. And yet they are still seen as kind of a niche cause. And so I think fundamentally for me, particularly with my marketing hat on, I see that we have a real messaging issue, and we have not yet cracked how we position women and girls issues as causes that matter to everyone, and that focusing and investing in these causes will impact us all and improve lives for all of us.
Yes, well said. Mega, Sarah, anything to add?
Yeah, I was going to say something similar about kind of just share of voice. You know, I just read this great article in Rolling Stone about how suddenly periods are on the map, and Hollywood is taking notice and talking about menstruation. But what's been so interesting is that maybe the share of voice in Hollywood has changed, but the share of voice in pocketbooks has not. And so it's been very interesting to see so many, publicly talking so much about women and girls issues, but then not really moving the needle. And the thing that I have been I've been trying to frame, and obviously unsuccessfully, but the way that I've been trying to frame it is that, especially when I'm working with girls in India, you know, taking 30% of girls out of the school system and 46% of the girls out of the workforce because of menstruation, it's not just a women's issue. It's not just a health issue. It's an economy issue, and it's an issue about the entire economy of India. And so I think that it would be wonderful to see us framing these issues as not just, as Deborah said, not just these niche issues, but fundamental GDP, economic changing issues. And I know that the Girls Who Code team agrees. If there are more engineers, you know, we are going to see the economy grow and companies be built. And with Women Moving Millions, you know, investments, it's shown over and over and over again that when you invest in a female-founded organization, you know, they are the ones making more money. They're the ones repaying their loans. That is the thing. So I wish people could see it on a more macro level.
Yeah.
I would just, I agree with everything that was just said fundamentally. And then I would just add, you know, I think the 1.6, if I think of, you know, the fundraisers on the call who are doing this work, thank you. This is really hard. This is hard work to raise money for women and girls. And we do have a bit of a narrative issue as it relates to this work, and there is a communication hurdle that we need to get past. I also, as I look at the increase in funding for things like gender-based violence, I also see it sort of a hidden trend line that maybe gives me a little bit of hope. That the movement that has been gathering strength for women and girls since 2016, since the Women's March, that we are starting to see a little bit of a shift. And at Women Moving Millions, we do think about this, even though the numbers aren't showing it yet, that we are at this tipping point in terms of the work for gender equality. So I still see hope, even though I live that 1.6%. I know how hard it is to raise that funding. It's what brought me to Women Moving Millions, so that we could strengthen the funding ecosystem to the benefit of the whole movement. So I see hope, I see frustration, I see all of it in that number. Yeah, we've got some work to do.
Thank you. That really highlights something that I've been thinking about in terms of this, despite this increased attention that women's and girls' causes have received from the media in recent years. I think you guys have really dug into this a little bit. But kind of coming back to you, Sarah, your work is all about inspiring more donors to go bold for women's and girls' organizations. As you know, we are, of course, ecstatic to learn of Mackenzie Scott's unprecedented philanthropic leadership this week. And we hope that it will encourage others to do the same. And she hopes that it encourages others to do the same. But now that you've kind of been doing this for a bit, what do you think has been the most effective strategy or insight that has helped you bring new donors into this space? And Deborah and Meg, I'm sure you have, you may have something to say about this as well.
Sorry, just unmuting myself. Yeah, I think what is really different about women in philanthropy is the community aspect to it. And so we've been really effective at curating a community that is supportive, that is safe, that has trust built into it, where women can tackle issues related to wealth, and can explore leadership, learn best practices, collaborate together. And what I'd love to see with Mackenzie Scott is that, this isn't the one voice this year that we see and we can celebrate. I'd like to celebrate a chorus of Mackenzies in the philanthropic sector who are making these incredible, bold commitments and are doing it in a sort of uniquely feminist way. It's transparent. It's unrestricted and trust-based. It's bold, transformative giving for organizations. It is giving funding to those leaders who are close and proximate to the communities and the problems and the issues that they're tackling. Mm-hmm. That's different. That's where we want to see philanthropy move. And what I have seen, in addition to the invitation to be part of something collective. I mean, I think in what COVID has taught us is we are social people. We want to be part of something really collective. And so I think the connection of philanthropists to the movement for gender equality and understanding and clarifying that role has been really effective as a community, that you are part of an important part of the movement. Even if your hand isn't, in the soil, you are a part of this, and we are all in it together. And I think that has been really effective. And then also, I just think storytelling, and this is part of the communication piece, telling the story of women philanthropists, we have not done a good enough job at. But when I talk to each one of our members, they are incredible. The work that they're doing is so inspiring, so purpose-driven, so impactful, and we need to do a better job at telling those stories. And so when we talk to new prospective members, we share those stories. It gives us the opportunity to say, this is the community you're going to be coming into that is truly committed to this learning journey, and to experiment and to take risks together. And I think the last piece I would just add to that is leverage. So when you come together in a community, you increase the leverage that you have as an individual. So whether you find your collection of folks who are focused on gender-based violence or specifically girls leadership or whatever that is, when you come into a community, a collective, a giving circle, you expand exponentially the impact that you are going to have. And that just accelerates the progress that we're going to make in terms of the work for women's rights globally.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. I think Sandra Shahardi is on the call today, and so I'm sure she's beaming. You really hit on her fundamental C's in terms of women and donors and giving. And so throughout your response, I was writing down all of this. So in action, it's about curating and clarifying and communicating. But for the donors, women, it's really about collaboration and community and collectiveness. And I love that idea of chorus. I'm going to add that to the C as another way to describe how women are drawn together and inspired by each other. So Sarah, thank you so much for that response. I want to ask Deborah to talk to us a little bit about another C, corporate. So corporate support has been an important source of funding for Girls Who Code, as you just shared with us. Maybe share a little bit more with our audience about why you think this is, and any tips for other nonprofits that are looking to generate more support for corporations, in particular for women and girls.
Yeah, so it's very unusual for nonprofits generally to have corporates as a primary funding source, and particularly for women and girls organizations. I think what has cracked it for Girls Who Code is that we are fundamentally solving a business problem that corporates have around a diverse pipeline. If they could do this on their own, I think they would, but they've recognized that they can't. And so they need to invest in a solution that will help them build a diverse pipeline of female engineers. And so I think the key to getting corporate funding, and particularly sustainable corporate funding, because I do think that, you know, corporates tend to also be really attuned to what's happening in the news, and they will give on kind of big causes, as I think we've seen this summer with COVID. We saw a lot of corporate giving around Black Lives Matter and our overdue racial reckoning. But I think that without long-term solving a business problem for corporates, it's hard to make that sustainable and beyond a moment. And so our focus when it comes to corporate is always reporting back how we are building the pipeline for them, how many girls we've reached, how our alumni are converting into computer science majors, which is the kind of key indicator that corporates use for hiring. How many of our alumni our corporate partners have hired, how they are retaining in the workforce compared to non-alumni. We share a lot of that data because at the end of the day, making the business case to them for why they're investing is how we get them to sustain over the long term.
Great. Thank you, Deborah. Picking up off of something that you mentioned with regards to COVID-19, I'm going to throw this to Mega. You know, as I shared earlier, this COVID-19 and the pandemic has disproportionately affected women and girls around the world, and you're in a unique position to share what that worldview is with our audience. So let's explore this topic a bit and talk about the implications that the pandemic has had for you, your work, and women's and girls causes in general, but certainly for your core mission of the Desai Foundation.
Yeah, thank you. So as an organization that tries to empower women and children, mostly girls, through our health and livelihood program, we had to take a hard look about what we thought health and livelihood looked like in a circumstance like this. And, you know, we had already 100 programs set up for March, April, and June in terms of health camps and vocational training programs, none of which we were able to execute. So the first thing that we did was make a pledge to our team. We did not lay off a single member of our team because of COVID-19. We felt like it was really important that we honor the team that has worked so hard in doing the work. So that was the first decision we made, because we employ 30 people around the world, 2/3 of which are in rural communities in India. And the second thing that we did was we looked at the assets that we had. And the assets that we had were the people that we invest in. And so what we ended up doing was reaching out to the 10,000 women that we've taught to sew and said, hey, would you want to be a part of a program that fights COVID-19 and gives you a job that you can do safely from home? And so we launched our Masks of Hope program all remotely. And basically we were able to get the legal certificates that we needed to move around for about 5 of our staff members. And they literally would drop off fabric at the doorstep of a woman, and she'd be given a video lesson of how to specifically sew the mask. If she didn't have a machine, we would make sure that she got a machine. And we were able to just coordinate this kind of ridiculous thing, all because of the ingenuity of our team on the ground. And thus far, we've made 800,000 masks that we've distributed for free. We've employed over 300 women in safe jobs that they can do from their home. Most of these women are currently the only breadwinner in their family because of the pandemic. And they feel really great with, like, they've cultivated so much dignity for themselves because they get to be a part of this bigger fight. And for us, what the pandemic has taught us is how it's encouraged us to be as nimble as we've always been, but it really showed us that there was a reason we built our organization the way we did. But in terms of an investment perspective, it's been really interesting how, like, I think maybe naively, I expected investment in this program to skyrocket, right? I was kind of like, people are going to love this. It's everything we used to do with relevancy now. And suddenly I was like, why is the donations kind of just the same? I did reach out to some of my donors and ask, just out of curiosity, your donation went down this year instead of up, why? And it was really about people not totally understanding that, how long this is going to last. So it was kind of like, oh, this is a flash in the pan investment, and it's not going to really make a difference in the long term. Well, vaccination distribution in India is going to take a couple years. And this is a program that we're probably going to be running for 3 years. And so, we really believe in the mission. Thank you for asking the question. I feel like I'm rambling now a little bit, but that is kind of the way that we were able to pivot and try to use the assets that were available to us, these women who we've already trained, the facilities and the resources we already have, and our amazing team.
Yeah. So this made me think of something that a colleague of mine at the Lilly School shared, was that this idea that this COVID-19, it isn't a moment, that this is going to create really an era of how we are making, pivots today and in this moment in 2020, but these will actually be enduring changes on how we do business moving forward for a very long time. So the sooner as organizations we accept this idea of an era versus a moment, the more strategic and thoughtful and stronger we can be. So I'm going to speaking of pivots, I'm going to make, hopefully isn't too strange a pivot, but would love to hear from all three of you on this. Let's talk about men for a minute. Do you have any thoughts around how we can inspire more men to invest in women's and girls' causes? Who will unmute first?
I have so many thoughts. I think it really comes down to your source of philanthropy and the type of appeal that you make, your source of giving. I personally and I feel like I can say this in a safe space, am sick of hearing men say that they are giving because of their daughters or because of their wives or because of their mothers, because I wish that I heard them say they're giving because they understand the moral case for it. They see women and their colleagues as equal. But unfortunately, we don't live in that world yet. And so I will take the wives and daughters and mothers for now. But I think depending on your source, you're kind of going to tailor your messaging to male allies. For corporates, and it is almost always a male chief technology officer who is investing in us, we are often making the business case for why they should use their corporate funding. But, you know, people wear many hats and they are also people. So I think as one of the great comments said earlier, that you have to be ready to kind of make multiple appeals, that you have to appeal to their heart. And if they have daughters, maybe appeal to the future that they want to see for their daughters, in addition to appealing to kind of their head. One thing I do want to note, we just got and just announced that we got the largest single year donation that we've ever gotten from Jack Dorsey, the CEO and founder of Twitter and of Square. He gave us $2 million. And it was very much in the Mackenzie Scott mode as part of his Start Small initiative. There's you basically have one call with his single person running his Start Small initiative. There's no restrictions, there's no reporting required. And I think importantly, Jack is not a husband, he's not a father. He gave to Girls Who Code because he believes in the power of girls' education, and that if you lift up girls, you will lift up everyone. And that is kind of my hope for the future, that we can find more men who think like that and who understand the power of investing in women and girls to improve us all.
Sarah, Mega, do you have anything to share?
Well, I think that's true. I hear that a lot from male donors over the course of my career, that you've got to find that direct connection to understand sort of why I give. And I think there's a few things. I think investing in organizations that are focused specifically on male allyship is something that we should consider. As philanthropists, they're largely underfunded. They've often not been welcome in the movement itself. So I think that that's something that we have to really look at and examine. Two, I think, again, this comes down to communication and in the work that we need to do when we're talking with individual male funders or corporate leaders or whatever it might be, is to make a stronger case that, men are paying the consequence of gender inequality. So it's not just that your daughter's not going to go to, get the best education or the best job prospect after school. Men and boys in particular are also, they're suffering in this moment too. And trying to figure out how to make that connection more effectively, I think will benefit all of us, and that we can do this together. And, in philanthropy, we like to silo things. And that prevents some of the synergy and the intersections that I think in this moment are important for us to really look at and examine. So I'll there.
Well, and that's a great segue into my last question for all of you that I want you to weigh in on. And just to add a point to this idea of men, research at WPI shows that they are influenced by how others are giving. So if more people are giving to women's and girls' causes, men will too. And men are often inspired, as we all shared, about the experiences that the women in their lives are having. And so if the women in their lives are leaning into their generosity and their philanthropy, they will follow suit. So continue to model that and model this behavior and speak passionately about the things that you care about with the men in your lives, and they will follow suit. But kind of back to what Sarah shared with regards to this renewed focus on gender equality. There are a number of incredible initiatives that have emerged in just the last year or so, focused on women and girls and gender equality. And I'm always inspired when I see new and bold funding commitments and programs like Give Bold, Get Equal, as well as the Equality Can't Wait Challenge that launched this year, which is awarding $40 million for big ideas to expand women's power and influence. And then the Black Girl Freedom Fund, which is raising $1 billion by 2030 to support Black girls and young women. And so kind of as a final opportunity to share, and starting with Mega, and I'll go to Mega, Deborah, then Sarah. What inspires you in light of all of this, and what gives you hope for the future?
What inspires me is always the people we serve. We have this tradition of every Friday we like have a field worker go out into the field and do a quick little Zoom chat or FaceTime chat with one of our recipients. And I can't tell you how inspired I am by the people that we serve every day. And I am inspired by that, and I'm inspired by our team. And the reason I'm so hopeful is because we barely raise $1 million a year. I'm able to accomplish all of the work that we do with under $1 million a year. And I work really hard for every dollar that we raise. In fact, probably too hard. And one of the things that I always think about is, if we were able to connect more deeply with the people that are hearing our stories and donating, in different ways. Obviously, pandemic wise, that's tricky. But bringing people together and helping them connect. I think there's finally a real appetite for that. I felt a shift in the last 2 years of an appetite for people wanting to not just write a check, but really lean into the check that they are writing. And I really felt that. And so I'm really excited about that, because if someone wants to write us a check and give us advice and join the board and the whatever, I would love that. And that is kind of what we're looking forward to and excited. So what gives me hope is that I think people are gonna give more actively, and I'm really here for that.
Thank you, Mega. Deborah?
Yeah, I that really resonates for me, Mega. And I spend a lot of time talking to teenage girls. They're both the best and the worst. And it's this generation of girls that gives me hope. I think that a lot of what feel like, the tensions that we struggle with, that older generations have struggled with, just don't feel like issues. They take diversity and inclusion kind of for granted. Mm-hmm. This is a generation that I don't think will see women and girls causes or Black girls causes as niche issues. I think they feel fundamental to who they are. And as this generation rises into the workforce, I think they are going to demand something different of employers. I think we're already seeing that with the reckoning that's happening with corporates around race, around gender and sexual harassment. And as they become the CEOs and the entrepreneurs that are starting billion-dollar companies, I think they are going to start giving in to reflect those values. And so that's what gives me hope. I think our responsibility as the women that kind of sit in leadership roles today is to help pull them up and to give them support and guidance, because I think they are going to create the change that we've started and that we all want to see.
I get inspiration and draw hope. I really do believe that this is a possibility moment. I do believe this is a tipping point. And I feel that way because of the conversations that that I have regularly with our members. And the fact that we launched a campaign in September for 100 million, we thought, well, is this the right number? How is the market going to respond? And that we're already at 95 million just from our membership community, who recognizes and connected to the import of the moment and the era, and that we transition to that. It gives me a ton of hope. We are at a time when we are with the United Nations and UN Women establishing the next decade of gender equality targets. We're doing that at exactly the right time, I think, for the movement. And COVID has given us this opportunity in all aspects of our lives and in society itself to put that mirror up. And I think that will benefit this work. Of course, the first women VP, that gives me a ton of hope for women in this country, but also globally. Yeah. And, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, I spent a lot of time thinking about, like, gosh, how are we resting all our hopes, our dreams on this one woman? This poor woman's little shoulders are holding all of this. But then I really thought of the privilege of being in this role as executive director of this organization and getting to meet all of the incredible leaders who are doing this work, the next generation of leaders who can carry the torch for Ruth, for Gloria, for others. And I thought, man, I am so hopeful. Mm-hmm. Because the authenticity, the commitment, the just grit, the smarts, all of it is also what gives me a ton of hope and gets me up in the morning, knowing that, we have the leaders right now to take us across the finish line and to accelerate the progress that we're seeking to achieve. And we have this enormous transfer of wealth that's happening for women right now. And the collection of those two things, the combination, the force of that gives me a ton of hope.
Thank you. I've been studying philanthropy for the last 25 years, and I find that point that you just made with regards to this idea of this transfer of wealth, and we've been talking about it for a very long time. And Sarah, I see that. I see that in my own experience and in the conversations that I'm having, that this is really starting to happen, and women are really starting to lean into their generosity in a very different way than when I first started in my career a quarter of a century ago. And so really inspiring them and what the three of you have just talked about serves as this source of inspiration of really speaking to this intuitive way that women want to give, this idea of giving actively, as Mega said, and then something we always like to say at WPI, this idea of, in order to really bring a woman to transformational giving, you and her, as what we like to call them, the T's, the treasure, you really need to have engaged her in terms of time and in talent and in testimony. Advocacy has become such a huge part of how a woman leans into her generosity. And then of course, tithes, which is something that I don't think that we recognized early on when we were talking about philanthropy 2 decades ago. This idea that women will use their social capital to advocate for their passions. And what's so wonderful about all three of your organizations is that you allow women to do that and to really celebrate all the different ways that they want to bring their generosity to the forefront. So I want to thank all of you today for joining us. I feel like we hit most of the questions, if not through our conversation. I know that I've had some of our research team answering them directly, but we will record this session and have it available. It's being recorded, and so we'll have this available to share. And again, thank you. Happy holidays. Happy New Year. And be safe and well as we go into 2021. Thank you again, Deborah, Sarah, and Mega. You were wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.